It's easy to look around and notice everything wrong in your city. In this podcast by Every Neighborhood Partnership, join Grace and Andrew as they invite friends, activists, pastors, leaders, and city workers to discover what's good in the neighborhood. Join us for insightful conversations that will encourage you to see your city and its people in a new way. Hey, you're listening to What's Good in the Neighborhood. Today, as we round the corner on our series of In Fresno as It Is in Heaven, we're talking about this idea of being trauma-informed. So today, we were joined by our friend, Kim Contreras, who has been serving missionally in the neighborhood here in Fresno for over 31 years. And Kim has been really shaped by this idea of being trauma-informed. She gives really practical tips and resources about what it looks like to go at the slow pace of people. And we're really going to have a great conversation about what it looks like to be in this type of work for the long haul. So if that interests you or excites you about helping and serving your community, this one's for you.
Well, welcome to What's Good in the Neighborhood. My name is Andrew File, and I am so excited to be here with Grace.
Hello.
And Kim Contreras.
Hey.
So Kim is joining us in our series. Just as a reminder, we're in this In Fresno as It Is in Heaven series, which is kind of for us giving us foundational frameworks that EMP has adopted and have really just become part of our DNA. And so we're just having conversations around those type of frameworks. I have known Kim probably for 12 plus years. In previous work, I got to know her as somebody that was living in an urban part of Fresno and just trying to be Jesus, trying to be faithful as a neighbor, create space for connection and relationship. As I saw her and Manuel, I'm like, dude, these guys are the real deal. And then throughout the journey, Kim has kind of become an expert in this area of trauma-informed and really a framework and a tool that she's put into her practice. And now is doing new creative ministry and work in our city. And so we want to just explore that a little bit today. And really maybe at the end of this, we can actually even talk about some kind of personal tools, even as we are starting before camera and before rolling, how do we do this work for the long haul? So that we were talking about that. So maybe we can get there too for folks that are trying to consider this work for the long haul. So welcome, Kim. Glad to have you. Maybe just give us a little bit of your personal journey. How did you get into the work you're doing now? What do you do for folks that don't know you? Welcome.
Yeah, it is a joy to be here. So 31 years ago, actually this month, I came to Fresno with World Impact as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed 23-year-old just out of college, about 9 months. And when I think back on that journey of where I was, I would liken it to kind of like the mission stuff was always the Indiana Jones version of the church to me. And so it felt like, hey, I get to go on this great missional call with World Impact, right? And God is just good that way because he knows how we're made and got me here that way. And then from there, just really showed me how much I had to learn. And that has been a beautiful journey of really connecting relationally with people and doing so in a way where their honesty really began to help me see blind spots in how I understood the gospel and how I understood what it meant to love my neighbor. And so living in Lowell for 9 years, single during that whole time and getting a chance to really sit with people, understand my cultural biases that I had, understand my privilege, understand that there were systems at play in concentrated poverty that I had no concept of.
Yes.
Because I had grown up in middle-class America, in Iowa, very middle-class family and resourced in ways I had no concept of, right? So I had some awareness as a person who played sports of some of the dynamics, and my parents had owned an apartment complex down in an urban area. So I knew the dichotomies. I wanted to do urban work. I had originally thought I'd be a lawyer. That did not happen. And so, just traveling that, moving from Lowell then into Hidalgo, which was a brand new neighborhood on the screen about 22 years ago. And again, just having God say, yep, we're going to keep learning here and what it looks like to go into a neighborhood where he was already at work, but didn't have the same connectedness that Lowell had, and to begin that process of building safety with new neighbors and spending our first few years with no one really wanting to hang out with us and going,
like,
okay,
what are you doing here?
Right. Like, why are you here? And like trying different things and just some of our own personal journey, my husband Manuel and I, and learning so much from all of that. So
as you've, in that journey to Hidalgo, so, as Kim was saying, Lowell is this neighborhood where a ton of people have moved into intentionally to love and serve and be good neighbors there. Hidalgo, what have been some of the things you've done to be a good neighbor? Or how have you tried to be present in the neighborhood, or what kind of ways have you done service or work in that place?
Yeah, so I think just really trying to get to know people. So I remember making cookies and taking them to our neighbors, and my husband going, honey, they think we're crazy. And so I'm going, okay, maybe.
But that's what we did when I grew up.
Yeah, that's other places. Why isn't this working now? And so just really backing off from some of that very extroverted kind of ways, but really trying to show up when maybe there was something going on. So one of the families down our street that we got to know early on had a ton of kids, so we would spend time with them and their kids, and that became a really great place for us to just be with somebody in the neighborhood that actually was willing to have a relationship with us. And then from there it kind of spread, and then different things would come up, right? So your neighbors, and so things would happen on our street, and you would go out and you would be present, and you would be just as confused as everybody else about how to respond. And one of those situations, unfortunately, was their home catching on fire. And so we walked through that with them, and with the slum landlord, and with all the things of, they stayed in the World Impact building for a while, and they camped out in our yard. And, so there was just a lot of life. And I think you don't realize how much the community's watching you because you're just in it. And I think people who were there for the long haul were like, okay, they're not just looking to leave, because what we really picked up on was that programs had come and gone a lot. And people were really like, yeah, we'll see if you're still here in a while,
Wow, yeah.
And so that really helped. And we wouldn't have known that then, right? But it really helped just to be in relationship and stay present as best we could, not always doing it well, but
for context, because I'm sure this will come up as we actually talk about the trauma-informed stuff. What's kind of the current iteration of the work you're doing in Hidalgo and on the street?
Yeah, so started with a lot of kids stuff, family-oriented, church planning, things like that, and now really have kind of pivoted during the pandemic to doing a lot more trauma healing groups with World Impact specifically. Lead those all over because it's Zoom, right? So get to do those on Zoom, and then through Central Valley Justice Coalition, we have our safe house for survivors of human trafficking. And then really our heart's desire is to equip the church to be able to access these resources so that they can be present in messy situations with the tools they need for themselves, but also for the situation. Because I think people come in with good intentions like I did, and they run into things, and it gets really scary really fast personally, because there's things that they maybe haven't dealt with, which I totally get. And then there's things they're seeing that are just beyond what they could conceive. And so how do we help each other walk through that process?
So tell us a little bit about your journey in understanding this framework of trauma-informed care. Obviously you had, we all have life trauma and small T trauma, big T trauma. But, 20, 30 years ago, these weren't frameworks that anybody talked about, especially even mental health care and all that stuff. So what was your journey to realizing how to help folks process, how to help yourself process? When did the trauma-informed idea come to you? And how has that influenced you?
So funny, when I was doing Bible clubs, I realized we were teaching all these verses and kids weren't able to connect with them. And so I began going, okay, there's something happening like context wise here that we need to figure out. And so there was before their time, really, they were before their time, this whole set of series called Confident Kids. And I went to their training, and it really was social emotional learning before its time. And it was creating support groups for kids to connect with each other. And the scripture was very much story-based, and it was intentional to help them not just learn as many passages of scripture as they could, like I did in Awana, which was great, but it was to really help them connect with the person of who Christ was in the Bible. And so that started me going curious, right? Like, how do we keep doing this? Because this seems like there's something here. Yeah. And then about 10 years ago, about 2014, our family, having kids, my husband was a gang leader, came to know Jesus in jail, his tattoos are removed. Like, it's all this Hollywood stuff. But then when you live together, right, PTSD is a real thing. And my reactivity is a real thing. And trying to mesh those two lives together becomes messy when kids get added. And so we just were like, man, we need some new tools. Like, this is adding the kids is like, and all the things that were in the community, like, we just need some new tools. And so we went to Clear Thinking and this group of Christian counselors who had literally spent probably before that about 15 years trying to figure out trauma. Yeah. And they really taught us about our brain, which was one of the most amazing tools I'd ever been given. And it's one that we really front load now with our volunteers and with our survivors and with anyone we're working with, because it takes it out of this personalized, I am crazy space to, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense why I'm doing this. This makes sense why my limbic system has been protecting me this way for so many years. And literally with our survivors, I can't think of a person I've done this with yet that doesn't cry from relief to know they're not crazy, but that their brain has absolutely been created by God to help them get through these really horrific situations. And it's actually pretty amazing how it does it. Now, getting to our frontal lobe becomes more work, right? Because we've become limbic system experts. And so seeing it as an asset instead of a detriment was really helpful in flipping the script for us.
Give us, some folks have been through trainings, right? Some folks haven't. Give us like a 101. Like, when you use those words, what is the limbic system, frontal lobe? Like, what are those things?
Yeah, so the limbic systems are incredibly amazing reactive place. So it is meant to keep us safe and away from danger, right? So the amygdala, which is centered behind our eyes, picks up all those cues starting very early. Amygdala is the same size today as it was when you were born. So that gives you some context. Like, it's active and moving and on. And so that amygdala takes in the information and it processes it in milliseconds and immediately gives you that information through the hippocampus. Do I have a memory that would help me here? And if those memories, they don't know time, they don't know space, so they show up when you're an adult, even though they happen when you're 2. Right? So you go down this very fast response of fight, flight, freeze, and one that's definitely coming into a lot more attention, which is fawn. And so all that just happens within milliseconds, and it's meant to keep you safe. So when you live in an atmosphere where you have to live on alert like that, the amygdala actually swells and becomes incredibly sensitive to those situations. And so it takes time for that amygdala to actually come down to a normal size again, and for it to be able to access hippocampus, which is our memories that are floating in there to get us to the right place. And when you are in that heightened state, you actually can't add new memories to the hippocampus. So when you take that all in, it makes so much sense when I sit there with a survivor 6 months later and they still are not seeing the new reality they're sitting in. They can't take in that there's this whole support system that literally would move mountains for them, because it's never been there like that. And so to give the brain time to heal and to access the frontal lobe and to help them see how that's been a strength. But now if they're moving into more of a frontal lobe world, which is executive function and planning and calendaring and making appointments and doing all those things, like, you don't have a PhD in that.
Right.
So how do we help walk you through till your frontal lobe can begin to take on some of those skills? And so to see it that way really brings down a lot of that reactivity, I think, personally. And when we are bringing people from a world, most of our, helpers or folks that are coming in to try to volunteer, they come from a frontal lobe world. And their reactive system is something that hasn't had to play such a big role because there's been resource and there's been privilege, and they have lived in a situation where if they called somebody, they could get where they needed to go. And that has not been the experience for my folks who are growing up in concentrated poverty and have experienced abuses. They've had to become specialists.
Yeah. It sounds to me like being trauma-informed is like a slow down approach. Like it's going to go slower than you want it to. And you're probably going to have some more patience than you ever, especially if you're coming from a frontal lobe and you're dealing with people that are coming from a different space. So why, I think for those of us who maybe are working more in our frontal lobe, that ignorant question can sometimes be why? Why does it matter that I go at this slow down trauma-informed pace? And what's on the other side of that for people that have gone through trauma? You're working with people that are in concentrated poverty. Why does it matter to slow down at the pace of being trauma-informed?
It's a great question to say, why am I here then, right? So are you here to see some success happen? Are you here for grant funding? Are you here? So if you are here because this person is what matters, then that becomes the focus. Like, how am I walking with you? And what do you need, right? And what do I need? Because sometimes you realize in this journey, right, that it's not about the other person. It really is about you. Like, why do I need to go faster? What is that about? And so to be able to sit back and look at maybe some of your own small T traumas, I think is kind of the word you used. And is our approach healing centered? Like, are we looking for healing centered approaches, or are we looking to just get people through a checklist, right? Which is hard if that's the space and that's your expertise, right? So we're asking you to become an expert. And so I hope there's a connection relationally of like, we're both in this to learn, right?
Well, and I think, there's a myth in America of like meritocracy, right? Like if I, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps is the acronym to think about that, right? So it's like, if I give this person this chance, this job, this interview, this whatever, and they don't do it, it's their fault, right? So we're so quick to blame folks instead of recognize, at least for me, this approach has helped me go. So even as EMP, man, our goal and our vision, we want to see every parent, every resident know they can change their neighborhood. Like that's the big vision. Okay, great. I want them to start working on community change tomorrow, right? I want them to go legislate. I want them to talk to a council member. First, they just got to come to a space and know they're loved, So our parent groups start with a parent coffee hour that is relational and connective and creating safe space. And they realize, oh, I have a story. I have a voice.
Yeah.
I can do something here. But that's a year or two later, right? To get them to action and mobilization, because at first they have to know, am I loved? Am I cared for? Am I just being used by this organization, right? And so I think outside of that, I just look at them and go, I gave you a chance. You didn't do it. It's your fault. We often do that.
Yeah, we want our return on investment.
Yeah, quick.
Yes.
Quickly.
Yes. Yeah. And we also, I think that's such a good question that you ask, why am I even doing this? Because that really gets to the heart of it, right? And that might expose some stuff about you of I'm actually serving in this org, nonprofit, ministry, whatever, because I want to be a part of this change. But when that change doesn't come as quickly as we want it to, well, now forget this. I'm out. When we're talking about people, right?
Yeah, and really self-compassion there, right? Because we've all been there. We've all had those moments. I look back at all the people who were patient with me and helped me to learn, and I want to be that person, right? I don't want to look at my volunteer who's not able to stay in there and go, oh, well, lost for you. I want to be able to go, oh, yeah, that was Kim at 28. And that was me in my process. So how do I stay in there also with the people who aren't getting it? Because we need each other to keep this learning going on. And so one of the things we've been playing around with at the Central Valley Justice Coalition is this idea of like that they do in the medical community, like where someone disconnects from us, instead of going, oh, tough loss for you, we actually sit down and go, okay, what happened there? Where did we miss it? What tools did we employ? What else needed to be employed? Did we need a resource? And do kind of like this background of, the audit of wow, if this person's left our program, instead of just assuming it was about them. We actually, I've just walked with so many survivors where they've been in these different programs, and it's like they have a reactive moment. And instead of the person who's there to help them being able to de-escalate the situation, they match the reactivity, which totally makes brain sense, and so they're climbing up the reactive scale, and I'm watching this thing happen going, this is going to blow.
This is the same.
This is going to blow. You're doing the same things to each other, right? And it really is this line in the sand that's very middle class. Like I grew up with that line too, right? Like don't cross this line or the punishment is coming down. And so I see that like line get drawn in the sand, and it's like, ooh, how do we back away from that? How do we say, we are not either one in a good space right now? And I think that's a lot of our internal work of like clear thinking, we call it noticing the tension, like knowing what your body does when it goes into that tension space. And then actually being able to visually, because we can pull up pictures with our occipital lobes so much faster, having a picture of what you look like and going, oh, okay, that's where I am. And I need to do my breathe. I need to walk away right now. I cannot help this person right now. Someone else, I have a team needs to come in, because I've seen people lose their housing. I've seen people have horrific consequences because the people on the helping end were not able to say, I am not in a good space right now. But because I have the power, right, and I have the privilege, I can decide you don't get that now. And then we never stop and go back and go, oh, wait, was there something we could have done different in this situation? And so that's one of our hearts, is to like, how can we help in a safe space? Because just like we need to create safety in the neighborhoods, we need to create safety in these organizations to help them be willing to step back from the line and go, And then if we put people who've been in a limbic state in authority over programs, because we want lived experience experts, which is absolutely as it should be. But then we don't have good help for them so that they can continue to watch their own reactivity, because they have lived experience, but they also have lived limbic experience. Right. And so for them, it touches on all kinds of stuff that is different than it touches on for me. And so walking alongside both sides going, woo, we need some help to back away from our lines.
That's good. And your vision, your hope, what is your hope in this trauma-informed kind of, like, you said it a little bit there, but even speak directly to like, leaders, other organizations, like what is your dream that they would begin to internalize? What do they need to offer to their staff, to the people they work with? Like what's the hope and the dream in this space?
Yeah, I think it would be to take that first step of understanding how that brain works and really taking it out of this emotional space. But like, we have facts. Like, God has given us this, we are living in a time where we can understand how this works, and then to move from there to saying, let's create some plans to internalize how we're going to go back and look at how we did things. Instead, we're so flooded with need all the time, right? So we don't have those spaces. It feels like it's a waste of time, right, to create those spaces, but to say, okay, let's do the back work. And then I think we've learned enough about trauma too. Like in the medical community, if somebody comes in and we triage them, we know the next step is this. And then if this thing happens there, then we know the next step is this. And I think we're really at a place of understanding the brain and trauma where we could start to create some of those pathways for our systems within.
Not just medicine, you're saying.
Like so if somebody's coming in and they're super activated, that is not the time to ask them to fill out their paperwork. Okay, so now we know, okay, so then what's the plan? Because it's going to take time, right?
Yeah.
And we're not going to get the paperwork filled out maybe right then. But if we could take the walk with them, if we could offer the meal, if we could say, okay, she's on the reactive scale, she's at a 10. There is no frontal lobe today. We need to get that down. And if we can get it down, then we can revisit the paperwork.
Well, and I see this happening slowly in some of our schools too, where schools are slowly creating these rooms where kids can de-escalate. Hey, like a kid, instead of just going to the principal, they get detention, like you're bad, right? Like go to this room. You're probably not in the best spot right now.
Yeah.
There's a teacher there who's like, hey, you want to talk? Do you want to just go fiddle with that thing in the corner? Whenever you're ready, 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, we can go back to class, right? And let that kid come back down, instead of their home environment is probably a place where they get yelled at and there's a consequence, or there's a lot of other things happening that they've learned a pattern in a system. And so often our schools can repeat those same patterns and systems unknowingly. So it's been fun to see that slowly take root as well in our schools.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm seeing way more of that. And then that makes me think with schools, like we need to revisit suspensions. Like when did that ever get to be a good Sunday kid home? That's where they that's where they like to be anyway, and that is not helping them do anything new, right? So I think I think the code switching too, like if we're sending someone with someone in an organization to go advocate for them, do they know the code switching that needs to go on there? Because that's well documented now, right? Like we are not in a mystery land about that. So, when I have a survivor go into the IRS and they get told these things that are just not making sense to them, who's there to help translate and break that down so that they can keep walking forward?
Yeah.
So I think those are some of the big ones that I see is like helping and then we need a safe space as the helpers then to come back and revisit our own traumas.
Yeah.
Right. That have happened in those situations.
Yeah. I want to go there. But before we do, I wanted to talk about like this idea of making assumptions about people's trauma too. And like, what does it look like to enter in with curiosity? I think we can, you work with a certain type of person or people that live in this neighborhood or that walk this street. It's probably really easy for you to make a lot of assumptions about who they are, what they've gone through, where they came from, their family of origin, all of that. What does it look like for you instead to choose curiosity?
Well, and I think that comes back to, right, knowing when you're feeling that tension. So I think the body piece is really important in that, because I can be sitting across from you wanting to be curious, but if my body is feeling the tension and then my shoulders are coming up and things are going on, I could have the right words, but I'm still not internally doing anything different. And so helping our people, not just, because I've seen people be curious, right? But it's not about building that relationship or that connection. It's almost more for their own, like, how do I figure out what's going on here? And how can I use this? It becomes more of a tool for themselves, and it's not really about the connection. And so I think getting honest about what we're feeling in our bodies at that time is really important to be aware of. And then to have that community around you to kind of say, okay, you're asking, because my husband, because he grew up, right, the PTSD on the questions and the curiosity is really high for him. He says it really triggers him to feel like a cop. He's like, he'll say, like, I spent time with that person, I felt like I was with a cop. Because they want to know stuff. Like, they're being curious, right? They're trying to understand, but there's not a... And I remember a woman in my car saying, hey, Kim, I really like spending time with you, but you ask a lot of questions, and I feel really uncomfortable. And that was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Like, well, what else do I do? And
that's so interesting, because some people could, depending on your background, could be like, oh, they really like me. They're getting to know me. It's amazing. And then other people are like, you are all up in my business.
Bingo. And I've heard that so many times with so again, slow, right? So let's go do something together that's more levels the playing ground and alongside, go where they feel comfortable, which you will not feel comfortable, right? I remember taking one of my gals to Starbucks for the first time, and she was just, I could read it all over her instantly. And she's just like, could we go to McDonald's? I'm like, absolutely. We're going to McDonald's, And so it just, I think flexibility flexibility becomes like, do you trust that the person that you're trying to get to know will tell you what's best for them? And can you just flex with that? Or do you have to argue about that? Do you have to try to convince them, oh no, Starbucks is really a better place than McDonald's, you know? Yeah. And I've seen that happen, right? And you're like, oh dude, you're missing the point here. And so trying to help that person understand that flexibility and why it's critical.
It's been fun because my sister-in-law volunteers with you. And so I hear the stories of like, I just heard one, I think the other week, of a gal who's now employed. She's been there for months, off the street, right? Like, but I also know that same journey was years and years and years and, highs and lows. She's doing great. She's doing really bad. She's back on the street. Her kids aren't with her anymore, all these things. So, are there moments of success? Anything you're celebrating right now in this work?
She's one of the celebrations for sure. Yeah. Watching her thrive and having her say, hey, you guys want to go to the Mediterranean restaurant next week? And
you're like, what?
What? Yes. Wow. So yeah, she's definitely a big piece of that celebration. I think too, being where I am, 31 years into this, getting a chance to see other people being willing to jump in and do this work and be able to walk beside them. When we started survivor work, when I met my first survivor 30 years ago, we didn't have the language we have now. We didn't have the understanding we have now. And so I am really encouraged, honestly, it's hard. And it's amazing that we have the resources we have. And I think there's good understanding. I think people are starting to really not just say they want to be trauma informed, which I think can just be facts, right? Yeah. So embodying that, like, what does it look like to really pursue healing and not just know what trauma triggers are? So I think there's more of those questions because we're realizing just being trauma informed sometimes doesn't translate into different results. Yeah. So that's exciting to me too. And I've been able to sit on those calls and talk to people and help be a part of that process. Yeah.
Speaking, kind of as we begin to wrap up, speaking to the leader, the person listening, what should they be doing to be people? I love Henry Nouwen's book. He talks about wounded healers, and our hope is all of us are on that journey. We all have pain. Some have really big T trauma, some have small. But what do you wish leaders, people listening, would do for themselves?
Yeah. Yeah, so April 13th, there's a trauma university at the Impact Center by Clear Thinking, and they'll be doing the brain from 9 to noon. So I just feel like that is such a great place. If you haven't really dived into how that works, I think that's a really easy, accessible tools are really important. The Deepest Well is one of the best, accessible books to understand ACEs and how it shapes things, but that there's so much positivity to knowing these things that it doesn't have to just be a negative. You really can flip it and use it for good. And how Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris has been doing that is beautiful. Yeah, I think getting honest with your staff and each other too. Where are your safe places? Because if you don't have them as a leader, or if your safe places have become so affirming to the things in you are still pretty broken, where do you need to go? Do you need a counselor outside of that situation? Do you need a spiritual director? Where else are you going to get that rub? And I think we all know it, right? When we've got an echo room, that means you're always hearing what you're doing is okay. And that's not good as a leader. Yeah. We need those people who can say, hey, you really kind of blew it that time. Yeah. So those are the things that come.
One more question.
You bet.
We talked a little bit before we started about sustainability, doing this work for the long haul, doing work where you're in direct contact with people that are living in their limbic system. You've been doing it for 31 years. How? And how would you encourage young people, young leaders, nonprofit leaders that are I'm on year 5 and I'm tired and I'm maybe feeling the burnout? Yeah. What would you say?
Yeah, I think if you're feeling the burnout, then you got to let someone know, and you've got to figure out what's a sustainable schedule, because my guess is that you're probably not taking any time off. And even when you have your time off, I'm wondering if you're still answering texts, and I'm wondering if there's ever a time in your week where you're completely disconnected from it. So yeah, I think that Trauma Stewardship is a book on secondary trauma, and that is another one that gives 16 trauma responses that we have as secondary trauma responses. So to know what yours are, and then I think beauty is really important. Where can you get away and really be disconnected from the world? That's been huge. Our sabbatical in 2020 helped push a lot of resets.
Good.
Exercise. I don't necessarily do it because if you look at me, you're like, really? But I do it every day because
You
of
walk,
all
right?
the.
Don't you?
I walk and I do a.
Come on, Kim, don't
I
undercut
know. What in
yourself.
the
No, I'm
world?
just saying, I wish it translated into pound loss, but menopausal world isn't like that. So anyway, but yeah, there's this wonderful, fabulous 50s lady. She's got a crazy accent, so I don't listen to her a lot of times. I'll turn her off and play my podcast or things while I'm doing it. But yeah, finding
great.
that thing that you can get active with, because adrenaline and cortisol are real, and our bodies need a way to work that out. So whatever that looks like for you, right? So those are things that have been, and then art processing, which isn't about making something pretty, but it's just about moving some stuff around. And I've been amazed. I'll never forget this 70-year-old guy that we were in a workshop with, and we put Play-Doh on the table, and he picked that. And he said, I haven't probably played with Play-Doh since I was 4.
Wow.
And he had an amazing experience of creating 2 things with the Play-Doh, and God just really spoke to him through that. And so I just think even, letting yourself maybe pick up a art thing that totally isn't you and moving it around. Yeah.
I call it my garden therapy because, got a
you
little
go.
garden in the backyard. Often I'll realize, I'm tapped out. I want to listen to a podcast or something. And I'm just like, all right, I'm going to do it quiet. And this is a different type of work, right? It's work, but it's with my hands, silent. I'm just like, I need this,
Yes.
I need to reconnect. I'm disconnected from myself even in those moments. So
Yeah, and that's a body thing, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Listening to the birds. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's been an absolute pleasure. I like learning things about myself as you're talking. I'm learning about parenting as you're talking, but also just really encouraged by you. And we're going to link everything in our show notes, all the books you mentioned, that event that you talked about at Impact Center. So,
and then if folks wanted to volunteer, folks can come out and
Absolutely.
join. If you're in the Fresno area, folks can come out and join, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So we'll maybe just link to your email. Folks
Perfect.
email you, or what would be the best way?
That email is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
thanks, Kim.
All right. Thank you, guys. This is good.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to find out more about EMP, you can visit us at everyneighborhood.org or follow us at EMP Fresno. Every Neighborhood Partnership and this podcast exists to activate, equip, mobilize, and transform here in Fresno and beyond. If you liked what you've heard, please share and review what's good in the neighborhood wherever you listen. We'll see you next time.